Hey everybody, my name's Dr. Scott Giacomucci. I'm the author of Trauma-Informed Principles in Group Therapy, Psychodrama, and Organization. And today in this video, I want to introduce you to content from chapters 5 through 10, focusing on the 6 trauma-informed principles outlined by SAMHSA as it relates to trauma-informed organizations. So this video will be really useful for you if you're wanting to help your organization become more trauma-informed and wanting to better understand the relevance of trauma-informed principles for organizations in any industry. So I want to talk about the importance of safety within organizations and within leadership and the workplace. Again, safety being the first of SAMHSA's 6 trauma-informed principles. There's an old saying that hurt people. And as professionals, we really have a responsibility professionally, personally, and I would say ethically, even morally, to heal from our own past wounds, to minimize the risk that we might unknowingly cause more harm through our work. It's no secret that most of us are attracted to the helping professions because of our own past wounds, our own past traumas. And so we have a real responsibility to ourselves, to our organizations, and to our clients to heal, to engage in our own personal growth and our own therapy and our own healing. And I think this is particularly true for leaders, that in leadership roles, we have even more power and responsibility and risk for causing harm on large scales, in that we have a larger impact through our decision making. And so it's even more important that we're healing from our past wounds. So in thinking about safety in organizations, we have to consider that our staff and our colleagues, their sense of safety is going to impact their work. The safer our staff members feel, the more efficient they're going to be in their work, the safer they're going to feel in relationships, and the better they're going to be able to cultivate meaningful relationships with clients or customers and with colleagues. The higher their job satisfaction is going to be, the healthier the work culture is going to be, and the more committed they're going to be to the agency if they feel safe in that agency. Now, to really drill this point home and highlight the importance of safety in organizations, I want to talk briefly about a research study that Google funded that was called Project Aristotle. This was a 5-year research study, and Google, the company, dumped a ton of money into this research study, and they wanted to know, of all the different factors that impact organizations and teams across different disciplines and different industries, what's the factor and the element that most impacts team productivity? And to our surprise, or maybe not to our surprise, psychological safety was by far the most important quality. That the more safety workers felt in their organizations, in their departments, in their team, the more productive they were. So this is really important research to keep in mind. The trauma-informed principles are not just important in terms of ethics or because they sound nice, but they also really translate to improving the bottom line and the financial health, the productivity, and the success of organizations and teams in general. There's usually some sort of parallel process that'll take place between how leadership is cultivating or disrupting safety with their staff, and then how staff is able to cultivate safety with their clients or perhaps disrupting safety with the clients they're working with. So there's usually a bit of a parallel process there. If the leaders feel safe in the organization, they're able to help the staff feel safe in the organization. Staff is going to better be able to help clients and customers, community members feel safe in that organization. However, if leadership is constantly feeling hyper aroused and anxious, it's inevitably going to impact their interaction with staff members, and staff members are going to feel anxious and hyper aroused and unsafe, and that's going to trickle down and inevitably impact their interactions with clients and with community members, and it might contribute to clients feeling anxious or hyper aroused or unsafe. There's really been a number of different studies on psychological safety in workplaces that all highlight how it increases learning in a workplace, increases performance, and it actually lowers workplace mortalities. It's important that we're addressing all 5 layers of safety for our staff. Again, those are physical, emotional, and psychological, social, cultural, and moral safety. As a group worker, a group therapist, I'm often looking at organizations through the lens of group dynamics. And one of the ways I like to think about this is that in group therapy, all the group rules and group norms that we create are really there to establish a sense of safety and provide a container for the group work to take place. And in a similar way, in our organizational context, all of the organizational policies that we create provide a sense of safety and a container for the organizational work to take place. Whenever there's violations of policies and violations of ethics within organizations, it really is a violation of safety on multiple different levels, perhaps especially on a moral and social level, a psychological, emotional level as well. The moral, cultural, and social safety, even emotional safety, can be promoted through non discrimination and anti oppressive organizational practices. Safety in supervisory relationships really parallels the centrality of safety in the therapeutic relationship as it relates to psychotherapy context. So, when we're doing trauma therapy, any trauma therapist knows that safety in the relationship is going to be one of the most important qualities leading to successful outcomes in therapy. And I'd like to suggest that in a similar way, in our organizational settings, safety within our relationships in supervision with supervisees and employees is just as important, that it's going to be central to positive outcomes and success in our work together and in our supervision. Now, in group work, group cohesion is particularly important, and it has a determining impact on every individual within the group. And there's various research studies and meta-analyses being published that really highlight and validate just how important group cohesion is in group psychotherapy. That perhaps it's one of the most important qualities, if not the very most important quality for successful outcomes in group therapy. That the cohesion of the group as a whole impacts each individual within that group. And in a similar way, if we're looking at an organization as a group through the lens of group dynamics, we could argue that the overall group cohesion within an organizational team, within a department, within an organization, or within an organization as a whole is just as important. And so it would make sense for us as organizational leaders to take the time to spend the energy to devote the resources to cultivating cohesion within our team, within our departments, within our organizations. Now, there's some simple ways that we can operationalize this trauma-informed principle of safety within our organizations. Trauma-informed principle of safety within our organizations. And this is by no means a comprehensive list. And again, we have to define safety through the eyes of our staff. So the ways that we implement this trauma-informed principle of safety in our organization has to look a little bit different from organization to organization. But some simple things that work in many organizations include providing meaningful employee benefits, expressing appreciation to our staff, having wellness funds. We're setting aside resources that contribute to the mental health and well-being of our staff, having employee assistant programs, creating critical incident response teams and policies in case there's a crisis or a disaster within the organization, engaging in a culture of transparency from leadership about decision making and what's going on within the organization, discussions and actions related to equity and equality and diversity and social justice within the organization, celebrating staff successes and milestones, beginning staff meetings with a few seconds to ground, maybe even practice some mindfulness, take a couple of deep breaths. We used to do this in an organization that I've been a part of for a while called Miramont Treatment Center. The beginning of every staff meeting, we would take 5 to 20 seconds maybe to take a couple breaths together in silence and ground ourselves, to have a mindful moment together. And it was amazing how just 2 or 3 deep breaths individually and collectively would really, at least for me as a participant, it would allow me to set aside and contain whatever was going on before I ran to the staff meeting, to quiet my mind and to be fully present with the objective of the meeting at hand. So, this is a really simple thing you can implement in your organizations as well. And providing other self care services, reminders, and opportunities for staff, paid time off, vacations, flexible schedules, those kinds of things. Of course, the resources that an agency has are going to impact their ability to implement certain policies and provide certain benefits, and it's real. And regardless, there's always ways that we can be better, and we can be creative and implement some norms, policies, or just things that uphold safe workplaces and work cultures that don't require a lot of money or even any money. Really helps to involve staff in decisions about how we're cultivating organizational safety. In psychotherapy groups, one of the ways that we maintain safety for the group is through pre-screening and assessment of new group members before they join the group. We need to make sure that they're appropriate for the group and that they're not going to disrupt the sense of safety for the current group. And in many ways, our recruiting and hiring processes as organizational leaders is very similar to our pre-screening and assessment process in psychotherapy. So when we're recruiting and hiring new staff, one of the things we might consider is this person going to disrupt a sense of safety for other people in our organization? So at this point, I want to have us pause for a moment and reflect on, in your own experience in workplaces, what exactly are the things that help you feel safest? And what are some really simple things that you can do or you can suggest to enhance the safety in your workplace for your coworkers, for your staff, for your supervisees? Now, this second trauma-informed principle, trustworthiness and transparency, is also really important in organizations, in leadership. It's important for supervisors, for educators. And there's going to be parallel processes that emerge in how we're demonstrating or not demonstrating trustworthiness and transparency between the leaders of an agency and their staff, and between the staff and the clients. That if the leadership are demonstrating transparency and trustworthiness with the staff, it's going to be a lot easier and more likely that the staff are going to demonstrate trustworthiness and transparency with the clients that they're working with. Staff who feel trusted by their leaders are more likely to experience success than staff who don't feel trusted by their leaders. Sandy Bloom writes that the erosion of trust in the workplace has become a major barrier to instituting trauma-informed care. I mean, there's a real foundational aspect of trust in an organization between leadership and the staff. If the staff don't feel like they can trust their leaders, they're going to leave the organization. They're going to be disgruntled. They're not going to want to follow policies. They're not going to respect the leadership. Without trust, we lose our sense of safety. We lose peer support and neutrality. We lose the ability to collaborate, to feel empowered, and to celebrate diversity and identity. Trust is so important in workplaces and organizations. Now, trustworthiness and transparency go hand in hand, and they have a reciprocal relationship in that they feed each other. And this is confirmed by research in various fields of business, that when an organization and a leader demonstrates transparency, it directly increases the trust that the public, staff, and customers have in that organization. So a simple way to develop more trust is to practice transparency. And this applies for therapists, for supervisors, for educators, for leaders, for any professional. For staff are more likely to follow a leader that they trust. There was a meta-analysis they did on trust and supervision. Meta-analysis is essentially the highest level of research. It's where they take all the research studies, quantitative research studies on a given area within 10 or 20 years. And they do the fancy statistical analyses, combining all the sample sizes together so that we can see across all different populations and settings and industries what are the trends or the statistics associated with whatever we're researching. In this case, it was about trust in supervision. And what they found in this meta-analysis was that there were three main components that workers highlighted as supporting their trust in their supervisors. So three main components. First one is about a sense of benevolence. So when a staff member feels and knows that their supervisor has their best interest in mind, has good intentions, really cares about them and cares about the work and cares about the clients and cares about the customers, that they have more trust for that supervisor. Second area is competence. So when workers feel that their supervisor is competent, is skilled, is knowledgeable, they're more likely to trust them. Makes sense. In many cases, it probably makes sense that the supervisor should be the person who's the most skilled and the most competent in the job. And the third quality is integrity. That when staff members know they can trust the integrity of their supervisor, their ethics, that they're going to say what they mean and they're going to do what they say, that they come to have more trust in their supervisor. So as leaders, as supervisors, these are three really simple things that we can actively try to cultivate in our supervisory relationships: a sense of benevolence, a sense of competence, and a sense of integrity in our work. According to research, trust in one's agency leaders promotes a sense of self-efficacy, a sense of well-being, job satisfaction, work engagement, and even reduces work-related stress and exhaustion or burnout. So workers who feel that their leaders are not trustworthy are more likely to develop resentment, fear, insecurity, and to not feel safe at work. Trauma-informed leaders are trustworthy and ethical leaders. Trauma-informed leaders are open and honest about decision-making, transparent, especially during major changes, which is really going to help promote a sense of safety and trust. If we're just implementing policies and major changes in our organization without providing some context and some background and some transparency to our staff about why we're making these changes, it's going to disrupt the sense of trust. Many times, workers and staff members don't get to see the big picture of why decisions and policies and changes are implemented in an organization. So as much as we can, hoping to illuminate and make visible the bigger picture about why changes are being made can be really helpful in promoting transparency and thus promoting trust. Withholding important positive information is also dishonest. So positive information like gratitude, admiration, respect, and even love or empathy that we have for our clients or colleagues. Sharing these positive things is another way to practice transparency and a way to cultivate trust. Of course, there's going to be limitations to how transparent we can be as leaders, as supervisors. Some personal disclosures and sharing sensitive information about an organization is just going to be inappropriate, unethical, illegal, or even a violation of confidentiality or privacy. So we can't always share everything, which can make it really tough to be a leader at times. That we have information that the staff doesn't have and can't have, and we can't share that information with the staff, but we have to make decisions influenced by that information and ensure that the new policies and changes are adhered to. It's a tough position to be in as a leader. It's also a tough position to be in as a worker when changes are being made and you're not able to receive information about why changes are being made. So it puts everybody in a tough position. I would argue that the use of transparency can also include our use of self and authenticity with emotions as leaders. Of course, as therapists, we often use ourself, and there's a whole lot written about the use of self in psychotherapy. And I would argue that this is also relevant for leaders, the use of self. This can be a really powerful tool for leaders as just as it is for therapists. Many times leaders are idolized or feared or resented. And maybe this is because of so much abuse of power and authority and corruption in the past. And many trauma survivors, many of our staff members are going to be trauma survivors who have experienced abuses of power in the past. And there's going to be negative projections and transference that we're going to be the recipient of as leaders. And so many people in power end up becoming dehumanized because of these negative projections, because of these transferences, because of past trauma that people have experienced being projected onto the leader. I think this happens far more often than most people realize. And it's one of the most difficult aspects of being in a leadership role. Just by the nature of being in that role, you're going to be the target of negative projections. And so the use of self, being transparent and authentic about our emotions in a skillful way, can really help people humanize us as leaders rather than dehumanize us or project on us, and really loosen and lessen some of that burden. The use of self and transparency from leaders can help us engage on a human to human level with our team and with our community. Caring about our own internal conflict and our own emotion can help clients and staff see us as leaders and to see us as humans. Of course, as leaders, we have to be aware of our limits, and our emotions are much more effective. So, leaders who are aware of their limits and are aware of their emotions are going to be far more effective than leaders who try to hide or deny or repress their emotions and their limitations. So, emotions, sharing our feelings, sharing our emotions in helpful, appropriate ways really can help cultivate trust and relationships. Leaders who completely avoid personal disclosures, who avoid vulnerability and humility, are more likely to provoke negative projections from others and are more likely to be mistrusted by others. So I want to challenge us to pause for a moment and to consider, as a leader, how am I demonstrating transparency? How am I using myself as a leader? Who are the leaders that I admire, and how specifically do they demonstrate trustworthiness and transparency? You can always look to role models for leadership and learn from them. Now, peer support is also relevant in organizations, just like it's relevant in groups. So, this third trauma informed principle from SAMHSA, peer support, is particularly relevant for organizational leaders, supervisors, and for professionals, educators, to consider within organizational settings and other professional settings. In the same way that peer support is helpful in groups and communities, it's also essential in organizations because the organization is essentially just a group of people coming together. Social support within an organization can help reduce feelings of overwhelm from the workload and occupational stress, which can fuel negative impacts on attendance, well-being, organizational commitment, and even employees' intention to stay with a company long term. So, lots of really good reasons to focus on peer support within our organizations, not just moral or social reasons, but also really fundamental, logistical, and financial reasons why it would be helpful for organizations to spend the time to cultivate peer support in their departments and between their employees. The power of two colleagues supporting each other is sometimes even more powerful than a supervisor helping a supervisee. Naturally, there's going to be some topics that a employee is not going to want to talk about with the supervisor. They're going to feel like it's too vulnerable, or they're going to feel too ashamed bring it up with the supervisor, but they might be willing to talk about it with a peer who doesn't have any power or authority over them. In peer to peer connections in organizations, the power dynamics are balanced and level, whereas in supervision, there's a clear hierarchy and an unbalanced power dynamic. In the research on organizations, peer support shows promising positive impacts on workers' confidence, on their self esteem, on their resilience, well being, on their job performance, and even on job satisfaction. Peer support effectively helps to mitigate the impact of secondary traumatic stress and of burnout, compassion fatigue, and vicarious trauma, while helping to cultivate vicarious post traumatic growth in our work. And if you wanted to learn more about burnout, about secondary traumatic stress, and about vicarious post traumatic growth, I'd encourage you to check out some of the other videos on this channel, and specifically Chapter 11 in this book. Many staff members in an organization, their primary sense of fulfillment in their job is going to be related to the relationships with their peers at the job, more so than the actual work responsibilities or the organizational mission. And I find this to be true again and again and again, often for myself, for the clients I'm working with, for supervisees, for friends and family members. We spend so much time at work that the relationships that we cultivate at work become really meaningful and a big part of our life. So it makes sense that for many in their workplace, those workplace relationships with their peers are going to be really meaningful and important to them. Peer support can be cultivated in really direct and in indirect ways, including in supervision groups, in peer supervision spaces, in training events, in support groups for staff, peer support programs specifically, professional development initiatives, and in other simple things like having team events or team building events or simply having meals together as a team. In our organizations, I find it really important that we consider the sociometry of an organization and the group dynamics and sociodynamics that emerge within the organization. And so thinking about who's connected to who has experience that could benefit somebody else in the organization, who could I put in a position to somebody else in the organization where they could benefit and engage in peer support together, who has things that are important to them, or preferences, or identities, or cultural or religious backgrounds that mirror somebody else in the organization that might promote a new and unique type of peer support. So in my own organization, in thinking about the sociometry, I'm implementing my sociometric awareness through my hiring practices. And one simple thing I do is I will try to make hiring decisions in groups of 2 or small groups rather than hiring one person at a time whenever possible, or bringing 2 interns in at a time rather than bringing 1 intern in at a time. That way they get to come in a small cohort, and there's naturally opportunities for them to support each other as peers rather than feeling isolated or coming in and only having support from a supervisor or somebody who's at a different point in their career. We can even think about the positioning of our offices and our workspaces, who we're having share offices or who we're having be in offices next to each other or in the same part of the building, as promoting or inhibiting peer support even. And if we're engaging in shift work in our organizations, we can think about it in terms of who's on what shifts and the interpersonal connections between staff that could promote peer support on different shifts. So there's lots of different ways we can be thinking about peer support within our organizations. I find that very simply having regular team gatherings, team meals, or norms where team members are coming together for lunch or other trainings and events can create avenues for peer support that don't have to cost a lot of money or be overly formal or pressured, but really create informal peer support opportunities. Creating a work culture where peer support is encouraged within formal meetings, within supervision, and within the workplace really contributes to overall well being and supporting mental health and work satisfaction. As leaders, we also have to consider gaining our own peer support. Leadership can be really isolating. Many times, what happens is an individual will kind of work their way through a hierarchy within an organization, and they'll be in a department or in an organization where they have lots of peers, and they develop really important peer support relationships and connections with colleagues. And then all of a sudden, they get promoted to the supervisor role. And now they're supervising or responsible for managing the same people who used to be their peers. And all of a sudden, they lose all the peer support that they used to have based on this new role relationship that they have to engage in with folks where there's an inherent power imbalance. So being in leadership can be really isolating, especially in smaller organizations where there might not be as many supervisors or leadership roles or managers, and we might have to look outside of our organization to cultivate peer support with other leaders. There's going to be things that as leaders we simply can't share with others in the organization because of confidentiality or privacy, or it's information that would be inappropriate to share about our own feelings of being a supervisor, a manager, or a leader. And so it's important for us to engage in our own peer support outside of the organization as well. In my own experience, I found it really invaluable to do this for myself. So as someone who owns and directs an outpatient trauma therapy center, I connected with a colleague and developed a friendship with a colleague who runs almost identical, a very similar outpatient group therapy center nearby. And we have a meeting once a month on a somewhat regular basis where we come together simply for peer support. And usually we take half of the meeting and we split it up into two parts. And either I'll get the first half of the meeting to talk about and ask for support around whatever I need support on, and then she'll get the second half, or vice versa. And we kind of split it as evenly as we can, 30 minutes and 30 minutes. Sometimes this involves talking about the logistics of running a business, or legal or financial, or managing employees, or those kinds of kind of logistical things, and engaging in peer support in that way. But many times it comes back to the emotions that we experience as leaders, our fears, our frustrations, our anger, our vulnerabilities, our sadness and loss that we experience as leaders. And having a peer that can support us in that, who understands it, who has experienced similar things, who knows what it's like to own and direct a similar company that I own and direct, has really been validating and really supportive. So I really encourage you as a leader to cultivate peer support relationships within your social circle. And again, you might have to go outside of your organization to do that. So in thinking about peer support, I want to challenge us to pause for a moment and reflect on, in your own organization or professional circle, who is someone that you could connect with for peer support? Someone you could ask for support from, but also reciprocate and perhaps offer support to. Who's one person? And I want to challenge us to also reflect on how valuable peer support has been in the past for us. How meaningful our work relationships have been. How that there certainly have been times in the past, I imagine for any and all of us, where there were things that we felt more comfortable sharing with peers in the workplace versus sharing with a supervisor or a leader. And so peer support becomes that much more important in organizations for all these reasons. And again, we can't fully embody peer support without also considering the other 5 trauma-informed principles. This 4th trauma-informed principle of collaboration and mutuality is also really important in organizational settings. A workplace atmosphere that embodies collaboration and mutuality seems to have a positive impact on the worker's self-worth, on their self-esteem, on their level of confidence, well-being, job satisfaction, performance, while also reducing social isolation. One research study even discovered a connection between the worker's sense of belonging at their place of employment and depression symptoms. So, the more somebody feels like they belong in their workplace, the lower their depression is going to be. Another study in 2009 highlighted the importance and effectiveness of peer support, neutrality, and a collaborative workplace as factors that reduce secondary traumatic stress, vicarious trauma for folks working in domestic violence, interpersonal, for folks working in the domestic violence or IPV field as advocates. Furthermore, another study just a couple years ago explored 94 different workplace teams and summarized the central role that neutrality plays in promoting high quality connection, resilience in the workplace, and performance within organizational teams. So, organizations where individuals struggle to collaborate with each other are going to be ripe with conflict, with mistrust, with abuses of power, inefficiencies, and an overall experience of feeling ineffective at meeting the goals and the mission of the organization. So, collaboration and neutrality are really key and important for effective teams, effective workplaces. Collaborative leader is quick to ask staff for feedback, to listen to staff when they give feedback, and to create changes based on the ideas of team members and community members and clients, customers. I want to challenge us to take a moment and reflect on, do we really treat everyone in the organization with equal respect, regardless of their role, regardless of their title, regardless of their identity? And are there ways that we could, as leaders, as professionals, engage in asking for feedback more frequently from the folks we're working with, from clients, from supervisees, from colleagues? How could we further engage in collaboration? In the context of neutrality, we also have to consider neutrality as being connected to a sense of respect for identity and for culture. So neutrality is connected to the sixth trauma-informed principle, which urges us to consider the impact of culture, history, gender, and issues of identity. We can't fully cultivate a sense of belongingness for someone within our group, within our organization, if we don't consider and respect their identities and their culture and their background. Trauma-informed care implies that we have to create a culture within our organizations where the staff, the clients, the leaders are all treated with respect, regardless of their identities. Leaders must be willing to utilize their privilege in responsible ways and to take responsibility for healing from the ways that maybe we've been marginalized in the past. So leaders have both of these responsibilities. Leaders who have not worked through their own trauma are likely to cause harm to others, or at least will be limited in reaching their full potential as a leader. So it's really important as leaders that we're looking at our own past wounds and actively working to heal from them. Leaders who are unable to critically examine their own privilege while creatively leveraging it for good are also missing the mark on being the best leader that they can be and risking reenacting oppression or microaggressions with staff or with clients. This type of neutrality in relationships with clients and staff has to be more than performative. We can't just talk about it. We can't just make a YouTube video about it. We can't just tell others about how important it is to do, or put it on our website, or celebrate other holidays, or send emails about it. It has to be authentic and it has to be action-based rather than just a public relations show. So I want to challenge you to consider and reflect on, how do you actively cultivate neutrality and belonging in your work, especially with folks from marginalized backgrounds or with folks from different backgrounds than your own. So this trauma-informed principle of voice, choice, and empowerment is also particularly important for organizations and for trauma-informed leaders and leadership. Organizational leadership, like group leadership, is enhanced through a process of centralizing empowerment, voice, and choice. Remember, an organization is really just a group of people that come together. So all of those group dynamics and group leadership skills that we learn as group therapists and group workers are also really relevant in organizational settings. I feel like for my own journey of becoming an organizational leader was really enhanced by my experience training in group work and group dynamics and sociometry and psychodrama. So as trauma-informed leaders, part of our job, our role inherently, is to empower others to access their own leadership within themselves. And this comes back to that differentiation I talked about earlier in terms of the difference between power over, power with, and power within. That we want to be cultivating power with and power within rather than abusing our power and using it over others. In the research, there was a meta-analysis that shows that psychological empowerment is positively related to employee outcomes, job satisfaction, commitment to the organization, and job performance. And empowerment is negatively related to staff strain and stress and staff turnover. So there's lots of good reasons to focus on voice, choice, and empowerment within our organizations. Leaders can promote empowerment, voice, and choice through collaboration with staff, through providing professional development opportunities. Involving staff in the decision-making is one of the simplest and most powerful ways we can do this. Giving staff as much autonomy as we can in defining or redefining their role when possible. Providing access to organizational information, giving staff ownership in the organization and its initiative, really empowering them to feel co-responsible for the organization, and employing self-led teams so that there's a sense of collaboration that's cultivated. Also really helps to utilize democratic decision-making processes that as leaders, instead of just making decisions on our own that are going to impact others, that we democratically make decisions. We check in, we get feedback, we ask people what they think, what they feel about certain proposed policy changes. We ask them if they have better ideas. I know in my own organization, the overwhelming majority of good ideas and structures and policies we've implemented were certainly not things that I thought about by myself. Most of the time, they were suggestions from staff members, from graduate students and interns that we hosted, or from clients. There's a lot of rich information, feedback, and wisdom available to us as leaders if we ask for it. And we can really make our organizations significantly better if we're frequently asking for feedback and reading the feedback and implementing changes based on that feedback. So inviting feedback from staff, creating changes in policy and programs and practices based on it is one of the simplest and most effective ways to empower staff and to really show them that we value their voice. As leaders, we have to keep in mind that a large portion of our staff are going to be trauma survivors. If you're working with humans or you're employing humans in your organization, a large majority of them are going to be folks who have experienced trauma. So centralizing these trauma-informed principles within our organizations, in particular, voice, choice, and empowerment, will help our staff be the best that they can be, empower them to be the best version of themselves. So the organization and the leadership really needs to cultivate a core belief in the resilience, in the strength, and in the capacity of both the clients that are served, but also the staff that are employed in the organization. Leaders and staff have to be approached as facilitators of recovery rather than as controllers of recovery. So this comes back to that previous trauma-informed principle about collaboration as well. So I want to challenge you to consider, in spaces where you do have some power, how can you practice power with the people you're working with rather than power over others? How can you practice collaboration and empowerment? It might be helpful to also consider the examples of leadership from the past, of empowering leadership from the past that you've encountered. Who are people in your life that have empowered you? Leaders that you've engaged with that have helped you become the best that you can be? And what are the things that they did specifically that help you feel empowered? Perhaps we can learn from our role models in this regard. I also want to challenge us to reflect on how are we eliciting and incorporating feedback from clients, community members, coworkers, and staff in order to refine our work, our programs, and our organization as a whole. Do we have a formal and structured process for getting feedback? Do we do exit interviews when people leave? Do we give client satisfaction surveys at, at discharge or at different intervals? Are we asking for feedback from staff? What are the ways in which your workplace is empowering or disempowering? And what are the ways that you can cultivate or advocate or collaborate to create change within your organization? Trauma-informed leadership, similar to group leadership, requires a commitment to anti-oppressive practices, to cultural humility, and cultural responsiveness. Organizations oftentimes are a vessel for collective trauma either being reenacted or being healed. Again, a group is a microcosm of society. So this is also true in terms of an organization. An organization is a group. Therefore, an organization is going to be a microcosm of society as well. So the discrimination, the oppression, the racism, gender violence that exists within society, if it goes unchecked in organizations, will also emerge in covert forms of structural violence and institutional racism. So the sixth trauma-informed principle needs to be seriously considered, critically reflected on as it relates to each of the 10 agency domains that SAMHSA outlines, which were covered in a previous video. So I encourage you to reflect on those 10 domains through the lens of identity. How are we addressing, celebrating, preserving safety as it relates to identity and in every aspect of the organization's functioning, not just the services that are provided, but everything from cross-sector collaboration, governance and leadership, marketing, recruiting, financing. How is all of this taking into account identity of the people that we're working with and identity of the people we're serving? So how does your organization consider and address issues of culture, gender, history, and identity in each of these 10 agency domains? In which of these domains does your organization seem to best address issues of culture, gender, history, and identity? And in which of these domains does your organization seem to have the most room to grow in? So addressing issues related to identity often becomes performative, superficial, or fear-based attempts by an organization to avoid being called out by others. And I think this is really problematic. It's something that I'm particularly sensitive to. It can feel really fake. Through the lens of trauma-informed care, we can offer action-based practices for actively addressing these issues. My colleague Leticia Nieto and some of her colleagues in a 2010 publication remind us that awareness of social justice issues alone is not enough. They say that true allyship is when awareness is combined with action. So we need awareness plus action. So SAMHSA's 2014 publication on trauma-informed care outlines 9 different steps for cultural competency and cultural humility, cultural responsiveness, which are delineated by the Center for Mental Health Services. So here's the 9 different steps. The first is that we have to recognize the importance of culture, and we have to have a respect for diversity. Second step is that we maintain a current profile of the cultural composition of the community. So this means that we have to keep tabs on and have a sense of the diversity and cultural composition of the community that we're working with, the community that we're serving. Third step is that we need to recruit workers, employees, staff members who are representative in every aspect of identity of the community that we're serving. So this means that If we're serving a primarily Spanish-speaking community, then we need to be actively recruiting and hiring Spanish speakers in the agency. If we're serving a predominantly young community, then we need to be actively hiring and recruiting young professionals who are going to be able to better relate to the young clients we're working with. If we're serving a predominantly Black community, then we need to be actively recruiting Black professionals who are going to be able to better understand and advocate and relate to the community that we're serving. So the way I understand this is that SAMHSA is suggesting that the makeup of our organization in terms of identity should be reflective of the makeup of the community that we're serving. This fourth step is that we provide ongoing training to the staff related to culture and identity. The fifth step is that we ensure services are accessible, appropriate, and equitable. Sixth step that's outlined suggests that we have to recognize the role of help-seeking behaviors, traditions, and natural support networks within the community that we're serving. That in various communities have various and differing relationships to engaging with professionals, especially medical or mental health communities. And we have to be aware of and recognize the traditions within the communities we're serving and the natural peer support networks that are already present within that community. And that we can leverage and encourage people to engage in those support networks within their own community. The seventh step is that we're involving community leaders and other organizations within the community, and we're representing diverse cultural groups as cultural brokers, that we're involving the leaders of the community in the conversations within the organization about change, about policy, about future programming, and eliciting feedback. The eighth step is that we're ensuring services and information are culturally and linguistically responsive. So if the average person in the community that we're serving can't understand or resonate with the language we're using in our groups, on our websites, in the descriptions for services, then it's not going to make sense. And the ninth step towards an organization moving towards cultural competence, cultural humility, cultural responsiveness is that we're assessing and evaluating our program, our organization's level of cultural responsiveness. So it's not enough to just implement these steps once and be done. We have to be constantly evaluating over time the level of cultural responsiveness in our programs. So again, these are the 9 steps that are endorsed by SAMHSA for organizations addressing cultural responsiveness in their programming. So this really emphasizes how we have to revisit all aspects of an organization through the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Everything from the marketing, the recruiting practices, assessment, interventions we're providing, evaluations, aftercare referrals, professional development for the staff, training, and events. Every aspect of the organization has to take into account identity and culture. So I want to challenge you to reflect for a moment about your own organization. Do the identities of your agency staff at all levels of the organization reflect the identities of the clients and communities that you're serving? I really want to emphasize that everybody, regardless of their identity, regardless of their privilege or experience of marginalization, is impacted by issues of gender, sexuality, race, ethnicity, class, nationality, indigenous status, age, disability, religion, spirituality, all those aspects of identity that Pamela Hayes outlines in the addressing model. Everybody is impacted by all of them. It's not just something that folks in marginalized communities are impacted by. It's something that impacts everybody. So, this sixth trauma informed principle about identity, culture, history, and gender is also particularly important for psychodramatists.